The first time I saw Arya again was at her wedding, to my best friend Edward. The crowd cheered as she smiled under the ivory veil, her hand wrapped around his arm like they had always belonged together. None of them knew I was there, standing, behind the marble pillars, watching the woman who once promised to love me forever trade vows with the man who had betrayed me. 3 months ago, I lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to move, nothing but my thoughts to keep me alive. They thought I'd never recover, that I'd never walk again, that I'd die quietly while they built their new life. But I wasn't dead, and I was no longer paralyzed. I clenched my fists, feeling the strength in my legs that I had spent endless days rebuilding in secret. They had no idea I would be standing here today, watching them celebrate their stolen happiness. The ring she once begged me to put on her finger was now locked in my pocket. She wasn't supposed to see me again. And yet, tonight, I would take back everything. The officiant raised his hand to quiet the guests. If anyone objects to this union, speak, now or forever hold your peace. Perfect timing. I stepped forward, my voice slicing through the silence like a blade. I object. The gasps echoed around the grand hall. Dozens of heads turned, cameras lifted, whispers erupted. Arya's face turned pale instantly. Her lips trembled as her eyes locked onto mine. Edward's smile collapsed, his hand instinctively tightening on her arm as if he could keep her from falling apart. I walked slowly, deliberately, across the polished marble floor, each step echoing the weight of my return. Arya, I said, my voice steady, you forgot something. Her voice cracked, barely a whisper. George. Yes, it's me. I stopped just a few feet away looking at both of them, alive and standing. The crowd watched in stunned silence, waiting for what would come next. Arya was once the center of my world. I met her during my final year of college. She was standing under the old willow tree, flipping through her notes, hair catching the breeze like strands of gold. I still remember the way her eyes sparkled when she looked up and caught me staring. From that moment, I couldn't imagine my life without her. She was everything I wasn't, graceful where I was rough, composed where I was impulsive, her presence steadying the chaos inside me. I pursued her with everything I had, and she let me catch her. We built a life together slowly. My first job barely paid enough to cover rent, but she never complained. She always said, "We have each other, and that's enough." I worked long hours, trying to provide the life she deserved. She worked as a nurse back then, long shifts that drained her, but every night, no matter how late, we shared dinner together. Even if it was just cheap takeout, she would light a candle and make it feel special. Our small apartment was old. The walls thin, but it held our laughter, our late-night talks, and our quiet dreams for the future. Eventually, my hard work paid off. The business I started grew faster than I could have hoped. Contracts rolled in, and soon we moved into a beautiful home on the outskirts of the city. It had everything she had ever wanted: a garden she could tend, a spacious kitchen she adored, a master bedroom with large windows overlooking the hills. I surprised her with it on our 5th anniversary, handing her the keys with a nervous smile. She threw her arms around me and whispered, "You always make miracles happen, George." Success brought changes. My schedule grew heavier, the meetings longer, business trips more frequent. But every time I came home, she was there, smiling, waiting. Or so I thought. Edward entered our lives a year ago. He had been my best friend since childhood. We grew up together, shared everything. When my company expanded, I offered him a position as my second in command. I trusted him with my business and my family. I thought of him as my brother. He had dinner at our house almost every week, shared holidays, even helped me plan Arya's surprise birthday parties. There was never a hint of unease. Arya always treated him politely, but nothing more, or so I believed. Looking back, the signs were there. But love blinds you. Arya began spending more time away, claiming charity events, yoga classes, and volunteering kept her busy. I never questioned it. I was too caught up in closing international deals, signing contracts, expanding what I had built from nothing. She always smiled when I returned, always kissed me goodnight. I thought our love was unbreakable. The accident changed everything. Edward suggested the trip. Take a break, George. You've been running yourself into the ground. Go up to the lake house for a weekend. Clear your head. He insisted I take his car. Mine's got better traction for those mountain roads, he said. I thanked him, touched by his concern. I didn't know then that my trust was being weaponized against me. The brakes failed halfway down the winding highway. The car spun out of control, crashing through the guardrail. The world flipped as metal screamed against rock, glass shattered, and my body was thrown violently inside the vehicle. When I woke up, everything below my waist refused to respond. The doctor said the damage was severe. The spinal cord injury left me paralyzed. My world had shattered in a moment. At first, Arya was there constantly. She held my hand in the hospital, wiped my tears when I couldn't hold my grief. She whispered, "We'll get through this. We always do." But as the weeks passed, her visits grew shorter. The warmth in her eyes dimmed. She smiled less. Sometimes she wouldn't show up at all, sending apologetic texts about emergencies and errands. Edward visited more than she did. He brought books, talked about the business, reassured me that everything was under control. Focus on healing, he always said. I appreciated his loyalty. I thought I was lucky to have a best friend like him. Then came the envelope. It was delivered anonymously, slipped under my hospital door late one evening. Inside were photographs, blurry but unmistakable. Arya and Edward wrapped in each other's arms, their lips pressed together, their hands intertwined. My stomach twisted as I stared at the images, my chest tightening with each new frame. The pain of my injuries was nothing compared to the betrayal, consuming me from the inside. Every late visit Edward made after Arya's sudden absences, every evening she said she was too tired to come, every excuse, it all snapped into focus. They weren't just having an affair. They had waited for me to be too weak to fight back. The people I loved most had stabbed me while I was helpless. I couldn't breathe. The woman I promised to protect for the rest of my life, the man I called my brother, they had carved my trust into pieces. My marriage, my friendship, my entire life had been built on lies I was too blind to see. That night, as I lay staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I would not confront them from a hospital bed. I would not scream or beg. I would recover. Quietly, completely. And when I returned, it would not be as a broken man pleading for answers. It would be as a man taking back what was stolen. The days following my discovery were torture. Every polite smile Edward gave me during his hospital visits now felt like a knife twisting deeper into my ribs. Arya's distant phone calls, her soft reassurances that she was handling everything, were nothing but carefully rehearsed lies. But I let them both play their parts, pretending I suspected nothing. The more convincing I acted, the more careless they became. Recovery was grueling. The doctors believed full mobility was impossible, but I refused to accept their prognosis. Every morning before sunrise, I forced my legs to respond. At first, there was nothing but pain and failure, but eventually my toes twitched. Then my ankles moved. I trained silently, hiding my progress from everyone. The nurses believed I was discouraged, that I had given up. In truth, I was preparing. The private investigator I hired moved quickly. Every piece of information he gathered was worse than the last. Arya had not only emotionally abandoned me, but financially she had begun liquidating our joint accounts. Properties were discreetly listed under Edward's name. Assets transferred, behind carefully masked corporate fronts. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were actively erasing me from the life I built. Arya's absence became permanent. Her explanations turned into brief text messages, emergency meetings, extended shifts, charity galas, all lies. The photos didn't lie. Candlelit dinners, overnight stays, secret weekend trips to the villa that I had bought as a honeymoon retreat. My wife and my best friend, smiling, laughing, holding hands while the world believed I was confined to a hospital bed. The final blow came during one of Edward's hospital visits. He sat by my bed, placing a firm hand on my shoulder, feigning concern. "George, I know this is hard. I can't imagine how you feel, but you need to be realistic. Arya's struggling too, you know. It's not easy for her to watch you suffer like this." His words sounded kind, but the intent behind them was venomous. I stared at him, holding back the rage boiling beneath my skin. "You think she's suffering more than I am?" He gave a rehearsed sigh. "You need to let her go, George. Sometimes love means setting someone free." Love? That word burned in my ears. His calm demeanor made me sick. He wasn't comforting me. He was conditioning me to surrender, to hand over my wife without a fight. Days later, Arya finally visited. She entered my room, her expression carefully composed, as if she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. She didn't come close to the bed like she used to. Instead, she stood at a distance as though proximity might expose her guilt. "George, I wanted to talk to you about the future," she began softly. I didn't respond. I simply watched her, waiting for her to betray herself. She clasped her hands tightly. "I know how hard this is for both of us. I've been thinking about what's best for you, for me. You deserve to be happy, to live without the burden of this injury." Burden. That's what I had become to her. Her voice cracked slightly. "Maybe we should consider separating. You need time to heal, and I need to rebuild my life too." Her words were sugar-coated poison. She wanted my permission. She wanted me to make it easy for her. I kept my expression calm. "If that's what you want." Her shoulders relaxed, relieved by my seemingly easy acceptance. "It's for the best. We can remain friends. I'll always care for you." I nodded, hiding the storm inside me. "Of course. Friends." Her relief turned into a gentle smile. "I knew you'd understand." What she didn't know was that her freedom was temporary. The investigators' latest report confirmed everything. They had already set the date. The wedding would take place once the divorce papers were finalized. Quiet, discreet, no extravagant affair. Edward didn't want to draw too much attention, at least not yet. But fate offered me one final gift. The hospital called me in for a progress assessment. The lead neurologist looked at me in disbelief as I stood upright, unsupported for the first time. My full recovery was officially recorded, but at my request, the hospital kept it confidential. I wasn't ready to reveal my return just yet. Instead, I focused on building my strength and perfecting my timing. Arya and Edward thought they had won. They believed I was out of the way permanently. They weren't prepared for the man I had become, calm, methodical, and dangerous. The betrayal had burned away every trace of hesitation inside me. I would not confront them in court. I would not humiliate myself in legal proceedings. No, I would stand before them at the exact moment they believed they were untouchable. And I would take back what was mine in front of everyone they had fooled. The invitations were already printed. The venue was booked. Arya would walk down the aisle, in her pristine dress, smile for the cameras, and pretend to begin a new life built on ruins. But I would be there, waiting. Their happiness was borrowed time, and the debt was about to be collected. The nights leading up to their wedding were the longest I had ever lived through. Sleep rarely came, and when it did, it was shallow and short, filled with flashes of their betrayal. I lay awake in my empty house, staring at the ceiling, suffocated by the silence that used to comfort me. This house once carried Arya's laughter, her voice humming from the kitchen, her footsteps moving lightly across the floor as she prepared dinner while I worked late. Now, every corner whispered their deception. The empty side of the bed was a constant reminder that she had filled that space with someone else, with Edward. I replayed every conversation I ever had with both of them, searching for signs I had missed. Edward's loyalty, his brotherhood, his concern, All of it had been rehearsed lies. Arya's affection had transformed from warmth to routine, her touches becoming mechanical, her kisses losing their spark long before the accident. The truth had been there for months. I had simply refused to see it. I wanted to believe she loved me as much as I loved her. I wanted to believe my best friend would never covet what belonged to me. The anger burned beneath the grief, feeding a quiet rage I kept hidden. Every memory sharpened my resolve. I thought of our anniversary dinners, where Edward often joined us as our closest friend. I remembered the night Arya smiled across the table at him, her eyes lingering a second too long. Back then, I dismissed it as harmless friendship. Now, I understood it for what it was, the beginning of everything they stole. The betrayal wasn't just about love. It was about trust. They took my loyalty, my sacrifices, my devotion, and crushed them beneath their feet. Arya, who once promised to stand by me in sickness and health, didn't even wait for my condition to stabilize before replacing me. And Edward, the man who stood beside me through every struggle, had been watching for his opportunity like a vulture circling a wounded animal. Each day as their wedding approached, I kept training. My body healed, but the deeper wounds carved into my heart didn't. I walked through the rooms of our house, touching the frames that once held our wedding pictures, now stored away or replaced. The kitchen she loved so much was spotless, unused. I hadn't cooked there since her last meal with me, the night before the accident. I remembered how she smiled, served me wine, and kissed my forehead as I prepared for that weekend trip. The warmth of that night was nothing but poison disguised as comfort. I often caught myself whispering to the empty space around me. You could have waited, Arya. You could have fought with me. But she hadn't. Instead, she handed herself to Edward as easily as removing the ring I once slid onto her finger. That same ring sat in my palm many nights as I stared at it in the darkness, a symbol of promises broken, of vows destroyed. I closed my fingers tightly around it every time the grief tried to take hold. Not grief, not anymore. Purpose. The private investigator kept feeding me updates. The guest list, the venue, the schedule. I memorized every detail. Their happiness was now a countdown, and every passing hour brought me closer to the moment I would shatter their carefully constructed lie. But beneath my determination, moments of weakness clawed at me. There were flashes of the woman I fell in love with. Her quiet support when my business nearly failed, the way she would run her fingers through my hair when I couldn't sleep, her whispered encouragement when I faced impossible decisions. Was any of it real? Or had I imagined it all, blinded by my need to believe in us? I stood in front of the mirror some nights, staring into my own eyes, forcing myself to remember. She chose to leave. She chose to betray. And Edward? He never even hesitated to take what wasn't his. As the wedding day approached, the anxiety mixed with a strange calm. I wasn't walking into that venue for confrontation. I was walking in for closure, for justice, for dignity. Every moment of my silence was calculated. Every delay was intentional. I allowed them to believe they had won because it would make their fall that much harder. There was no need for revenge through violence or scandal. The truth would be its own weapon. The truth, delivered at the precise moment when they stood, at the height of their stolen happiness. I didn't want to destroy them physically. I wanted them to live with the shame, the humiliation, the weight of what they had done. The night before the wedding, I sat alone on the balcony of my home. The stars above were sharp and cold. The city lights flickered in the distance. Somewhere, across town, Arya was slipping into her wedding dress, rehearsing her vows, standing before the mirror while Edward waited eagerly to take my place. But they had both forgotten one simple fact. I wasn't gone. Tomorrow, under the same sky, I would stand before them, and neither of them would forget that moment for the rest of their lives. The wedding day arrived. The sun blazed over the city, casting long shadows across the grand reception hall. Guests gathered under crystal chandeliers, sipping champagne. exchanging compliments, smiling politely as soft music played in the background. The venue sparkled with luxury. White roses lined every aisle. It was perfect. It was exactly how Arya had always dreamed. I stood outside, calm, composed, watching the entrance. My pulse was steady, my breathing controlled. The private investigator stood a few steps behind me, holding a small black briefcase. Inside it were the final pieces, the insurance papers, the financial transfers, and most importantly, the police report. Edward's betrayal went even deeper than I originally believed. Days before the wedding, the investigator uncovered what neither of them expected anyone to find. The car I drove that day wasn't just sabotaged, it was deliberately tampered with. The brake line wasn't simply faulty, it had been sliced, clean, professional. Edward hadn't just stolen my wife. He had tried to end my life permanently. The surveillance footage showed Edward meeting an unregistered mechanic weeks before my accident. Cash exchanged, instructions given. The man confessed everything when the investigator tracked him down. The mechanic thought it was just business. He never imagined he was playing a role in an attempted murder. Edward wanted me gone. Arya wanted freedom. Together, they crafted a perfect plan, except they underestimated me. They thought I would die before I could uncover their lies. They thought I was too weak to return. Now, I had everything. As the ceremony started, I slipped into the hall quietly. The officiant stood before them, reading from his script. Arya stood radiant in her gown, her hand in Edward's, smiling at the crowd. Edward stood tall, wearing the suit I helped him pick out years ago when he was broke. Neither of them noticed me standing near the back, watching. The officiant's voice rang out. "If anyone objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. I stepped forward. Dozens of heads turned as the crowd gasped. Arya's eyes widened. Edward's jaw clenched instantly. The color drained from both their faces. I walked slowly, letting each step echo across the marble floor. My voice was steady, loud enough for every guest to hear. "I object." The officiant froze. The room descended into whispers and stunned silence. Edward's voice broke first. "George, you're supposed to be dead," I finished calmly. "Or paralyzed, or too weak to stand. That's what you hoped, wasn't it?" Arya's hand trembled in Edward's grip. She couldn't even form words. I turned toward the guests, speaking to everyone. 3 months ago, I was in a near-fatal accident. Many of you know that. What you don't know is that my accident wasn't accidental, it was engineered. I gestured to the investigator, who opened the briefcase and handed me the documents. "These," I continued, "are records of how Edward hired a mechanic to sabotage my car. Evidence of the payments, confessions, surveillance footage. He tried to murder me!" Gasps swept through the hall. Several guests stood up in shock. Phones came out. Cameras captured every word. Edward's face twisted in panic. "That's a lie!" I raised my voice, stronger now. "You thought I wouldn't survive long enough to expose you. You took my wife, my business, my life, but you failed." I turned to Arya, her eyes wide with horror. "And you knew. Maybe you didn't know how far he'd go, but you knew about us, about him. And still, you stayed silent." "No, George, Her voice cracked, desperate. "I never wanted you to be hurt." I shook my head. "You wanted me gone. You just didn't have the courage to say it." The police entered through the side door, their badges flashing. The lead officer spoke clearly, addressing Edward. "Edward Miller, you are under arrest for attempted murder and conspiracy." Edward stumbled backward, releasing Arya's hand. No, this isn't happening." Officers grabbed him, securing his wrists in cuffs. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Arya's breathing grew rapid, her entire body trembling. She tried to reach for me. "George, please. I didn't know everything. I didn't want this. I took a step back, my voice cold. You wanted a new life, you have it now. The officers escorted Edward out as the guests whispered in disbelief, their perfect wedding collapsing into chaos. Arya stood frozen at the altar, abandoned, humiliated, her entire world crumbling in front of everyone who once envied her. Tati, Hall remained frozen in silence even after Edward was dragged away. All eyes stayed on Arya, who stood trembling beneath the flowered arch that was supposed to be the start of her new life. The polished marble beneath her feet reflected her image, a bride abandoned at her own wedding, exposed before the very people who once admired her. I stood still, watching her. My chest burned with every breath, not from rage, not from revenge, but from the crushing weight of everything we once were, now reduced to this shattered moment. Arya's lips trembled as she tried to hold herself together. George. Her voice cracked like thin glass. Please. Let me explain. I didn't move. I simply stared, forcing her to confront everything she had become. Her breathing grew shallow as she looked desperately at the guests, at the cameras pointed in her direction, at the whispers passing from one shocked guest to another. She clutched, the edge of her gown, as if holding on to it might somehow keep her from falling apart completely. I never wanted to hurt you, she whispered. You have to believe me. I kept my voice even. You didn't want to hurt me? You left me for dead, Arya. You moved into my house with Edward before the doctors could even tell if I'd survive. Tears streamed down her face. I thought you wouldn't make it. I thought you were gone, George. And when Edward was there, you chose him. My voice cut through her sentence. You weren't confused. You weren't lost. You were greedy. You wanted a way out without having to carry the guilt of walking away from me while I was breathing. She shook her head violently, as if rejecting her own truth. No, that's not true. It started as comfort. I was broken. I was scared. You were selfish, I corrected sharply. And he was waiting. Her sobs grew louder as her shoulders shook under the weight of her shame. Guests continued recording, their faces reflecting a mixture of pity and quiet disgust. No one came forward to comfort her. The people who once adored her now watched her unravel like a tragic performance. I stepped closer, but not out of sympathy. I wanted her to hear every word. When I lay paralyzed, unable to move, unable to speak, I still had hope that you would fight for me. I believed that our vows still meant something. But you weren't fighting for me. You were preparing to replace me. Her tears blurred her vision as she looked up at me. I thought you wouldn't wake up. Edward told me you might not come back. And I didn't know what to do. I narrowed my eyes. You knew what you were doing. You wore my ring while you shared his bed. You pretended to mourn me while planning a wedding. The tension in the room was suffocating. No one dared interrupt. The once celebratory hall now resembled a courtroom. Arya's hands clutched her chest as though trying to hold her breaking heart together. George, I still love you. I swear I never wanted you to get hurt. You still love me? My voice dropped, calm, controlled. You hired Edward's mechanic to cut my brakes. Her face twisted in horror. No, I didn't know about that. I swear I never agreed to that. You may not have given the order, I said coldly, but you gave him every reason to act. You opened the door for him and he walked through it. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the marble floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The once proud bride now sat at the altar like a discarded doll, broken and exposed. The string quartet in the corner of the room sat frozen, clutching their instruments, unable to escape the unfolding disaster they had been hired to perform for. The silence was broken only by her desperate whispers. I just wanted to be happy again. I stared down at her. You could have fought beside me. You could have stayed. But you chose the easier path, Arya. You chose betrayal. And now you'll carry it. She reached for my hand, her fingers, brushing against mine. "George, please, can we try again? Now that everything's out, we can fix this. Please." The absurdity of her request was almost laughable. She thought there was still something left to save. After everything. I slowly pulled my hand away, denying her even that small comfort. "There is nothing left, Arya." Her sobs grew louder. "I can't live like this, George. You can't just walk away and leave me like this," I whispered, my voice cutting deeper than any scream could. "You walked away first." The cameras flashed, capturing the final collapse of her world. There would be no hiding from this. The media would spread the footage across every screen by morning. The woman who played the grieving wife while plotting her husband's disappearance had now been unmasked in front of the entire city. As I turned to leave, I felt no satisfaction. No victory. Only emptiness. The damage they caused couldn't be undone. My marriage was dead long before my accident. All that remained was the shell they tried to bury me under. The doors of the hall opened before me as I walked outside into the cool afternoon air. The light hit my face, and for the first time in months, I breathed freely. Behind me, the shattered remains of my past lay in ruins. Ahead of me stood something better. Peace. Lily waited by the car, her eyes filled with quiet concern. She had stood by me through my recovery, through every painful night and agonizing setback. She never asked for anything. She only offered her support without condition. She spoke softly as I approached. "Are you all right?" I nodded. "It's done." Her voice was steady. "You didn't have to face it alone. I would have stood beside you." "I know," I whispered. But this was something I had to finish on my own. Her hand gently reached for mine. Unlike Arya's desperate grasp, Lily's touch was calm, grounding. It wasn't possession or guilt. It was genuine care. Turned to face her fully. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "You never needed to thank me," she said with a soft smile. "You just needed someone who wouldn't betray you." As we stood in the afternoon light, I felt the final chains break. Everything that had once tied me to Arya and Edward was severed. Their lies, their schemes, their betrayal, all burned to ash under the weight of truth. They had tried to end me, but I had survived, and now I was finally free. The weeks after the wedding scandal unfolded like an avalanche, swift and unstoppable. News channels broadcasted the footage non-stop, Arya sobbing on the marble floor, Edward being led out in handcuffs, the police reports revealing the attempted murder plot. Public sympathy, once firmly in Arya's corner, evaporated overnight. The headlines called it exactly what it was: betrayal, conspiracy, greed. Edward's trial moved fast. The evidence was airtight. The mechanic's testimony confirmed everything. The brake line wasn't worn. It had been sliced with precision. The surveillance footage showed Edward delivering the cash payment, outlining every detail of the plan. His attorney tried to argue temporary insanity, but the judge wasn't interested. The verdict was harsh and final. 25 years in, prison for attempted murder and conspiracy. He wouldn't be seeing freedom anytime soon. Arya wasn't spared either. Though she hadn't directly orchestrated the crash, the financial records exposed how she had funneled assets behind my back. Fraud, embezzlement, and accessory to attempted murder painted an ugly picture in front of the court. Her tears did little to soften the blow. She was sentenced to 15 years with no chance of parole for at least 10. The courtroom had been packed on the day of sentencing. I sat in the front row, watching both of them stand before the judge. Neither of them dared to meet my eyes. Edward stared at the floor. Arya trembled as the cuffs were placed around her wrists. The same hands that once held mine tightly, that once promised loyalty in front of family and friends, now shackled, cold, and exposed. As they were escorted out, Arya looked over her shoulder one last time. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. She had already spoken every lie. Every tear was meaningless now. After the trial, reporters hounded me for interviews. Everyone wanted my side of the story. How it felt to survive both physical destruction and emotional betrayal. I declined every request. I wasn't interested in fame or public pity. I wanted my peace, something neither of them could ever reclaim. The house we once shared sat empty. I didn't sell it. I had no interest in profiting from the place where my life had been dismantled. Instead, I had it completely gutted. The furniture, the photographs, even the walls, everything that had once belonged to our life together was stripped down. Nothing remained of what we were. I donated every trace of our past to charity, leaving the house hollow. The silence inside no longer carried the weight it once did, but not everything in my life was empty. Lily never left my side. Through every stage of the trial, through every sleepless night, through every storm, she remained. She never asked for explanations or promises. She simply stayed, quiet, steady, loyal. The exact opposite of everything I had lost. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the city skyline, the sun dipped behind the horizon, setting the sky on fire. The gentle breeze carried the faint scent of spring. Lily handed me a glass of wine, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about them?" I sipped slowly before answering. "Not in the way I used to." She watched me carefully. "Does it still hurt?" I paused. The pain wasn't sharp anymore. It was a dull scar, something that would always exist but no longer controlled me. "It doesn't control me. I've moved forward." Her eyes softened. "I'm proud of you, you know." I smiled faintly. "You're part of the reason I made it through, Lily." She looked away shyly, as if unsure how to respond. But I wasn't done. Not anymore. For so long, I thought I needed Arya to feel whole. I thought love was sacrifice, that if I gave everything, it would be enough. I paused, looking directly at Lily. But real love isn't measured by sacrifice alone. It's measured by loyalty, by choosing someone even when circumstances are hard. Lily's eyes glistened under the soft glow of the evening lights. "I never wanted anything from you, George. I just wanted you to be okay." I reached for her hand, lacing my fingers through hers. "And that's why you're the only person I trust now." The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. Across town, behind tall concrete walls and iron bars, Arya and Edward lived out the consequences of their choices. Their names faded from the headlines. The world moved on, but their shame remained, etched into every file, every record, every whispered conversation behind prison doors. Arya's letters arrived every few months, written in neat, desperate handwriting. Apologies, regrets, pleas for forgiveness. I never responded. There was nothing left to forgive. She made her choice. So did Edward. One of her last letters contained a photograph, our wedding day. She had written only 2 words on the back. "I'm sorry, I burned it." Some things didn't deserve to be kept. Lily and I continued building something entirely different. No grand promises, no elaborate declarations, just quiet, simple days filled with trust. We traveled, we cooked together. We talked late into the night without fear of hidden agendas. What we shared wasn't built on borrowed affection or secret betrayals. It was honest. Years later, as I stood at the edge of the property overlooking the hills where my former house once stood, I thought back to how close I had come to losing everything. The crash, the betrayal, the lies. And yet, somehow, life had brought me to something better, something real. Lily stood beside me, slipping her arm through mine. "You ready?" I nodded. "I've been ready for a long time." We turned together, walking away from the place that once held my past, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back.